Hi everyone. Now we are going to discuss the quantitative research and how it is differ to the qualitative research. So let's look into the difference between qualitative and quantitative. So let's begin with the two research methods. So we have the first one, the qualitative, which you have discussed during your practical research one. Now, on practical research 2, we are going to focus on the quantitative research. What is quantitative research? Quantitative methods emphasize objective measurements and statistical, mathematical, or numerical analysis of data collected through polls, questionnaires, and surveys, or by manipulating pre-existing statistical data using computational techniques. Here, it is clearly that the quantitative research is purely numerical. Unlike the qualitative, it's purely words. Now, moving along, we note that quantitative research focuses on gathering numerical data and generalizing it across groups of people or to explain a particular phenomenon. We use quantitative research if we are going to use numerical data and not data coming from opinions of others. Let's look into the characteristics of quantitative research. The first one is that the data is usually gathered using structured research instrument. As you can see, polls, research questionnaires are strictly following rules on how we are able to write it. Hindi naman po pwedeng gagawa lang tayo ng survey questionnaire or magkakandak lang tayo ng isang poll without being reviewed by our research advisors or by your research advisor. Let's make sure that this instrument that we are going to use is reliable and verified by experts. Now, the second characteristics of quantitative research is that the results are based on larger sample sizes that are representative of the population. We note that the use of quantitative research, we need to represent the population of a certain or the number of population of a certain community or a certain group of people or group of something that you are going to test. In the quantitative research, the views of the smaller is the views of the bigger population. That's why we are going to look into a randomized sample so that we are able to come up with a good quantitative research. The next characteristics of quantitative research is that the research study can usually be replicated or repeated given its high reliability. Pwede natin gamitin ang mga proseso ng isang quantitative research na nagawa na at pwede natin itong ulitin sa pakatuwid upang gawin ang ating sariling research. Ibig sabihin ng replicated ay hindi naman natin gagayahin mismo yung kanyang buong research. We may use the process that is being introduced by other researchers and it will be replicated or repeated on our own research. Sabi nga natin, one of the aims of quantitative research is to validate. So if are going to validate some research, therefore, it should be replicated or repeated process. The next characteristics is that the researcher has a clearly defined research question to which objective answers are sought. Here, we want to identify a very, very clear research questions that will answer our research problem. Take note that these research questions will answer our research problem, which will give us a clear solution to our problem. Then, another characteristics of quantitative research is that all aspects of study are carefully designed before data is collected. As I mentioned, that the instrument that we are going to use should be reliable and verified, which means that before we collect the data, all of the process that we have uh, been done, if you're going to use quantitative research, has been totally and carefully designed by you, the researcher, and approved by your research advisor. Then, another characteristics is that data are in form of numbers and statistics, often arranged in tables, charts, figures, or non-textual form. This is one highlight of a quantitative research to a qualitative research. It is because we use tables, charts, and figures compared to the qualitative research. Here, the figures, the data that we are going to present will be shown to our readers through this imaginative way. So, yung data pa lang, nagsasalita na para sa ating research. Another characteristics of quantitative research is that the project can be used to generalize concepts more widely, can predict future results, or investigate causal relationships. And lastly, the one of the characteristics of quantitative research is that researcher uses tools such as questionnaires or computer software to collect and analyze the numerical data. Sabi nga, dahil online na tayo ngayon, we may use Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, and other survey platforms come up with data gathering for our survey research. And then this data will be analyzed through SPSS or Microsoft Excel. Pwede din namang gumamit ng Google Sheets. We will learn more about using these tools as we move along on our discussions with this practical research tool. Now, there's a question. When to do a quantitative research? Kailan nga ba natin kailangan gumawa ng quantitative research? At paano natin gagawin ang quantitative research? The first one, we do quantitative research if our study aims to find out the answer to an inquiry through numerical evidence. Paulit-ulit nating sasabihin na ang quantitative research ay para sa numerical evidence. If you sought to come up with a numerical data, therefore, you are going to do a quantitative research. Number two, we do quantitative research if we want to measure improvement. For example, meron kang gustong patunayan na magbabago sa isang task or sa isang teaching style. We can use a quantitative research because you want to identify if there's an improvement or not. And lastly, we do quantitative research if we test hypothesis. It is another clear difference of quantitative research to qualitative research is that we formulate hypothesis on a quantitative research and we test our hypothesis. Only quantitative research has hypotheses. Second question, what are the types of research or quantitative research? There are four. One, descriptive research. Two, the correlational research. Three, the causal comparative or the quasi-experimental. And the fourth one is the experimental type of research. All of these four will be discussed on our future lecture discussions. Let us move along now to the advantages of quantitative research. Do you think there are advantages and disadvantages of quantitative research? Of course, there is. Number one, quantitative research is an excellent way of finalizing results and proving or disproving hypotheses. Since quantitative research has testing hypotheses, therefore it is an advantage for us to use quantitative research to prove or disprove our hypothesis. Dito naman natin malalaman kung sasabihin natin na I accept or reject the hypothesis when we come to the conclusion part. The second advantage of quantitative research. Quantitative experiments are useful for testing the results gained by a series of qualitative experiments, leading to a final answer and narrowing down of possible directions for follow-up research to take. The third advantage of quantitative research is that quantitative experiments also filter out external factors. If properly designed, and so the results gained can be seen as real and unbiased. You can see here that quantitative research has become unbiased because we use numerical data in a randomized manner. Ano ibig sabihin natin? We get our sample by getting it randomly. While qualitative one, we choose our sample. Here in the quantitative, we don't have the power, wala tayong kapangyarihan upang piliin kung sino ang ating magiging respondents. Sa quantitative research, randomized, ibig sabihin, bubunutin lang natin may iba't ibang paraan para malaman ang pagkuha randomly ng ating participants kung saan i-discuss natin sa mga susunod na lecture. Let's move on now to the disadvantages of quantitative research. First one, quantitative experiments can be difficult and expensive and required a lot of time to perform. Bakit? For example, if you are a scientist and you want to come up with a new idea or a new product and you want to test the efficacy and efficiency and the effectiveness of your product, then you are going to come up with an experimental type of quantitative research. So gagastos ka ng marami mga materials, equipments, you will come up with lots of time you are required to a lot of time to analyze, to gather your data. This is one of the disadvantages of quantitative research. Hindi katulad sa qualitative, you can interview, you can have the focus group discussion, you can immerse yourself without costing you a lot. The next one is that quantitative research must be carefully planned to ensure that there is complete randomization and correct designation of control groups. Kailangan very strict ka. Kailangan susundin mo kung ano ang nasa plano. Bakit? Magkamali ka lang ng isa, you will repeat. That's why this quantitative research requires you a lot of time. So you need to carefully follow what is planned so that all your results will be unbiased. The last disadvantage of quantitative research is that it also tends to generate only proved or unproven results, with there being very little room for gray areas. For example, in the social sciences, education, anthropology, and psychology is a lot more complex than just simple yes or no responses. We cannot make a full quantitative research on these areas of expertise. These areas needs sometimes a combination of quantitative and qualitative. We cannot make alone quantitative for these areas. But if that's the case, then it will be very difficult for us to analyze the data that you are going to gather. Let's look into now the differences, the key differences of qualitative and quantitative data. In a quantitative data, the results are precise and derived results in numerical format. While in qualitative, it is in-depth understanding and capturing the intangible nuances of a problem. Let's look on this example. During a community meeting, women explained that they spend a considerable amount of their day collecting drinking water used mostly for cooking, which leaves them with limited water for personal and household hygiene. So this is a qualitative data from a approach, this being on a worthy data. Unlike in the quantitative data, you will see the difference. 40% of the women interviewed said they spend more than 3 hours gathering water for cooking. In the qualitative data, it is not specified how much hours of the day has been spent collecting water or gathering water. And sabi lang, they spend a considerable amount of their day. While in the quantitative data, it is pinpointed 3 hours. They gathered 3 hours, or they used 3 hours to gather water for cooking. And here in the qualitative data, women explain. But here in the quantitative, there is a percentage how many women had been interviewed, 40%. You see the difference. Now, in the qualitative, more informal, unstructured, or semi-structured, and provides more flexibility in how the data is collected. So, pwede kasing kinausap mo lang sa isang tabi, tapos nagkwentuhan lang kayo, you just record everything that you have been talked about, and that's how you collect the data. But in the quantitative, it's more structured, defined, and less room for flexibility. Same set of questions for all respondents. Hindi pwedeng magbago-bago. Kung ano yung tinanong mo kay respondent number 1, yun din ang itatanong mo kay number 2, kay number 3, kay number 4, and so on and so forth. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng nagkukwentuhan ka kay qualitative kung anong maisip mo para lang mag-come up sa sagot na gusto mo, ay po pwede. Pwede kang mag-divert. Pwede kang rephrase ng tanong. But in the quantitative data, since it is structured, sabi nga natin kanina, the tool that you're going to use should have been checked. And you need to follow the plan. So since it's structured, isisundin mo kung anong nakalagay doon sa survey questionnaire mo or doon sa iyong interview guide. Kasi yun ang magiging definition mo ng inyong sagot. In the qualitative data, answers the questions how and why, as it is investigative in nature. So here, you are more deeper with the explanation. How, why. So there are different answers to be given. But in the quantitative data, answers the questions how much, how many, how often, all are quantifiable. May bilang. Okay? Let's pause for a while and let's look into how, again, that the qualitative and the quantitative data collection differs with one another. Okay, so let's move on now to our next. So let's see another difference between the two types of research. In a qualitative data, a small group of suitable respondents are chosen intentionally from sampling or for sampling. While in the quantitative data, it involves large group of respondents or sample population that has been chosen randomly or intentionally. Let's see. Large group of respondents turned into sample. In the qualitative data, small group, suitable respondents. Pinili. Kayo mismo ang namili kung sila ba ang dapat nating interviewin at kuhaan ng data. In the quantitative data, sila ba ay pasok sa isang group that will represent someone, or this samples will represent the entire population. Whether they are suitable or not, they will answer you will collect data from them. Next, in the qualitative data, in the qualitative research, it is an open-ended questions. Results presented mostly in text and longer reports. While in the quantitative, it is concise, closed-ended questions with yes or no or multiple choice formats. Halimbawa, ilang beses ka nanonood or gaano ka katagal nanonood sa YouTube? Letter A, letter B, letter C. In an open-ended question, bakit ka matagal na nanonood ng mga videos sa YouTube? So there are different ways on how you will collect your data in the qualitative and the quantitative research. Next, in the qualitative data, in the qualitative research, it provides rich data, valuable insights, and detailed information that are open for exploration and interpretation. While on the quantitative data, provides precise numbers that can be statistically analyzed and replicated for comparisons across different sites or intervention. Another difference between qualitative and quantitative is that the qualitative is descriptive and conceptual. Can be categorized based on the respondent's traits and characteristics. While on the other hand, the quantitative research can be counted, measured, aggregated, and expressed using numbers and values. Paulit-ulit natin talagang sasabihin that the quantitative research is more on numerical. You describe something by numbers. You analyze everything by numbers. Again, let's reflect on these differences between qualitative and quantitative research. Okay, for our last set of differences between the two. So we have here that qualitative questionnaires and tools are easier to develop, but data is difficult to collect. Sa kabilang panig naman, sa quantitative data, the questionnaires and the tools are difficult to develop, but the data is very much easier to collect. Di ba? Kasi sa qualitative data, you can make interview, you just need to write down the key terms that you want to ask. Then you just need to tell some stories as if you are friends with the respondents. You immerse yourself. So it's very easy for us to get the data that we wanted. Unlike in the quantitative data, mas mahirap. Bakit? Minsan ayaw ng respondent mong sumagot. Minsan naman, hindi naman ginagawa ng maayos yung pagsasagot sa quantitative data, sa mga surveys and sa mga tools, so mga tests, di ba? So it's very much easier to get the sample, the data that you wanted sa qualitative compared to the quantitative. It's much easier to collect the data, but it's very difficult naman to create the data, to create the tool in the quantitative data. Indicators are broadly defined in the qualitative, while the indicators are specific, measurable, and numeric in the quantitative research. Next is that this approach, the qualitative, can be subjective, interpretive, and exploratory, and can be subjected to bias with an interpretation of the open-ended responses. Laging may bias sa qualitative. The researcher can change the way where they wanted to have or to be, as if you wanted to make on that goal, on that certain goal, you wanted to be there, so you will direct everything to be on that goal. Unlike in the quantitative, the results are very easy to summarize, compare, and generalize. The results are numerical, objective, and conclusive. It is not biased. Diba? But whatever results that you will have, you cannot change it. It is already the reflection of all of the respondents' answers. And lastly, the last key difference that in the qualitative, the data analysis can be complex, time-consuming, and expensive. The analysis rules are not well defined, but in most cases, the data is summarized, categorized, and interpreted, thematic. And while in the quantitative, data is easier to format, organize, and analyze. Just need tables, charts, and figures. Analysis rules are very established because we are going to use statistics, and it's very easier for us to do it now using our computers. using our applications such as the SPSS and or the Microsoft Excel. The use of math and statistical analysis methods like regression analysis, averages, correlations, etc. can be found on the softwares that I have mentioned. Again, let's reflect on all of these differences, key differences of quantitative and qualitative research. Okay, to sum up everything, let's look into our short video clip.
Research. Come on, pack up your bags and get on the
So here,
bus, because we're about to journey
we are
through
going
qualitative and
to come up
quantitative research.
with a short video clip
Ba-da-da-da. Welcome to another journey with Chris, where we will obtain new levels of
from
knowledge and
Chris.
awesomeness.
It is
Hello,
from
scholars. Today we're
Chris,
going to journey through the basics
and
of
we are going to look
qualitative and
into the
quantitative
difference
research.
again between
On our journey, we're
quality
going to compare the
and
characteristics
quantity.
of both kinds of research,
So we are
including
going to
their
look
purpose,
into
research questions,
the
hypothesis,
purpose,
data
the
analysis,
hypothesis, the
and
data, the
final
analysis,
reports.
and how we are
Let's
going to
talk
do
about
the
the
final report.
purpose of both
So
types of
here's the
research. The
purpose.
purpose of qualitative research is to
The
explore the meaning
qualitative
of
and the
people's
quantitative.
experiences, the meaning of people's cultures, the meaning of how people view a particular issue or case, known as a case study. But the purpose of quantitative research is to examine the relationship between variables. Let's define a
In
variable.
the quantitative,
A variable is a
we determine the
characteristic. We'll
relationship
talk more about this in just a
of
second. But for this
variables,
class, we're going to learn about three kinds of variables:
which
independent,
we're going
dependent, and
to discuss on
extraneous.
the next
Independent
discussion
variables are
video.
variables or characteristics that are manipulated by the researcher. Dependent variables are characteristics that are impacted by that manipulation of the independent variable. Extraneous variables are variables that are extraneous to what the researcher is really trying to focus on, and they're usually demographic information such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, things like that. So let's say a researcher makes a poster that says, hey, you probably got some of you or other people's pee or poop on your hands, so wash your hands. The researcher puts up that poster in one bathroom and doesn't put it in another bathroom. Then the researcher watches to see if more people wash their hands after peeing or pooping who were exposed to the poster compared to those who were not exposed to the poster. It turns out that more people washed their hands who went to the bathroom where the poster was. The independent variable in this study is the poster on the wall. It was manipulated by the researcher. The dependent variable was the characteristic of hand washing. It was the effect of there being or not being a poster in the bathroom. Some extraneous variables are the people in the bathroom's age, sex, race, ethnicity, and so on. The point of the study was to examine the relationship between these variables. More hand washing, the dependent variable, took place in the bathroom that had the poster, which was the independent variable. Let's talk about research questions. Since qualitative research is exploratory in nature,
So
qualitative
for
research questions
research
usually start with the
questions
words what
and
or how,
hypotheses.
since these words imply discovery or exploration. Excuse me. For example, a qualitative research question could be, what are college students' experience in trying to eat healthy on campus? Or, how do college students celebrate the subcultural holiday of 420? Because qualitative research is exploratory, it typically does not have a
In the
hypothesis, which
qualitative,
is a
we
prediction.
answered the
In a
what
nutshell,
and how.
qualitative research tries to explore,
How
not
do
predict,
college
participants'
students?
views.
No hypothesis for qualitative.
Similar to qualitative research, quantitative research questions can start with the words what or how, but they might also include the word does in the beginning of the question. In descriptive quantitative research, research questions ask how much, how often, what's the relationship between variables, what's the difference between the variables. For example, what percent of male college students wash their hands after using campus bathrooms, or what is the relationship between college student gender and hand washing practices after using campus bathrooms? In experimental research questions, this is where they might start with the word does, such as, does hand washing increase when a poster is placed in a campus bathroom? Compared to quantitative research does have hypotheses
And
or
of
predictions
course,
about what will
we
happen
use
in the study.
hypotheses.
Typically, in qualitative research, researchers collect more than one type
Go
of
to the
data in order to
data.
get a better, more holistic picture of what's going on in the field. The data used in qualitative research is almost always in what people say or their words. This data usually comes from interviews, documents like newspapers or journals, etc., observations, and audiovisual materials like videos or audio recordings. Researchers usually obtain multiple types of these kinds of data in order to answer a research question. All of this data comes from the field, which means the natural settings where participants are. In qualitative research, researchers go into the field and spend a lot of time there interviewing and observing the participants and their environments. It's also important to note that surveys or questionnaires are also known as instruments. Well, in qualitative research, there are no instruments, no surveys. In qualitative research, the
You, the
researcher is
researcher,
the
is the
instrument.
instrument
What
for
this means is that the
qualitative.
researcher acts as an
As you
instrument. The researcher is
immerse
kind of like
yourself.
a living survey. They ask all the questions and make observations instead of relying on surveys to gather data. It's also important to note that a hallmark of qualitative research is its emergent design. This means that the way in which the study is conducted can change during the study. During qualitative research, it may become apparent that other forms of data from other groups of people should be included into the study. For instance, let's say that a researcher is studying college students' experience trying to eat healthy on campus. Originally, the researcher has planned to just interview a bunch of
And the
students, but let's say
qualitative
that
can change
during the
from one
interviews, the
method to
students keep talking
another as
about
long as
the ice cream
it's in the
area of the
qualitative research
cafeteria
design.
and student union. How there's over 400 kinds of ice cream and you have to walk around the ice cream to get to the apples and on and about the ice cream bar. Well, the researcher hears enough students talk about this crazy ice cream bar that the researcher decides that observational data should be included in the study. She needs to see the ice cream bar for herself and see how it overshadows the apple bin. She needs to see why everyone's talking about this crazy ice cream bar. So the research design emerges and different kinds of data might be collected as the study goes on. The data for quantitative research is in the form of numbers. These numbers usually come from what people check off on
Still,
instruments, which are surveys or
numbers,
questionnaires, or observational checklists
quantitative
and so
data.
on. So qualitative research looks at words, quantitative research looks at numbers. Let's talk about analysis. In qualitative research, analysis is
Let's
all about
move on
creating
to
themes.
analysis
Researchers read
of
their
our data.
interviews, look at documents, observations, and audiovisual materials, and then they organize all of that data, all of those words, into themes. This can take a considerable amount of time. There are often pages and pages of interview transcripts to read. For example, let's say a researcher interviewed students about their experience eating healthy on campus. From the interview, there were over 80 pages of interview text to read. From those pages, the researcher was able to group the data or analyze the data, group it into three major themes, which were students believed that there was a lack of healthy options on campus, the students believed the healthy options were too expensive, and they felt that unhealthy options were just too tempting. It's important to note here that qualitative research is inductive in nature. That means that the research questions, the data collection, the analysis, and all that stuff is not based off of a theory or preconceived notions that the researcher has. The researcher lets the data speak for itself and form itself into themes without the bias of an existing theory or existing ways of thinking about things already. On the other hand, in quantitative research, analysis involves the use of statistics to crunch numbers and figure out what those numbers mean in terms
In
of
the
answering a research
quantitative,
question.
there are
Qualitative
still
research looks at
numbers.
themes, research and analysis crunches numbers, statistics. Quantitative research is also usually deductive. It's based from existing theories and information that's already out there to help form research questions and how data is collected and how it's analyzed. Let's talk about the final report. In qualitative research, the final report is usually narrative in
For our
nature.
final
The authors will
report,
sometimes write in the first person. It's more interpretive and it contains a lot of writing and it has direct quotes from participants. The final reports for quantitative research are more rigid in form and it's more in the form of a statistical report. In conclusion, there are noteworthy differences between qualitative and
and for
quantitative
our
research in terms of their
conclusion,
purpose, research questions, data analysis, and so on. And this video is just an intro to each style of research. We're going to go into way more depth as the semester continues with each form of research. So thanks for a great journey, and I'll see you in class.
Okay, so that's it. That's our video clip. Okay, so at this point, I hope that you learned something about the difference of qualitative and quantitative research. So you may now answer your worksheets given to you. Then let's move on to an activity, which is the think, group, share. So here, instead of the last time that we had before, the last time that we had group discussions, we formulated these questions. And those questions were categorized as low or high level questions. For this case, we're going to formulate a quantitative research question about certain topics. So here, you need to formulate one question each. One question for each topics. What you're going to do is to formulate a quantitative research question. If you remember, based from the discussions that we had and the video clip that we had, there is a portion there of giving us examples of what or how we're able to come up with a quantitative research question. So by asking how much, what is the relationship, how often, this will give us a good research question for our quantitative research. So here is my instruction, or here are the topics for the think, group, share. So you need to formulate a quantitative research question about each of the following topics. So we have gender, we have learning styles, we have Philippine transportation systems or system. Then we have communication media. And the last one is public order and safety. Again, we need to formulate one question for each of the topics listed. Again, we need to create or formulate research questions. You're going to do it using your Jamboard. Okay?
Recording in
That, I hope that you learned something from this lecture. See you again next time and have a good day. Bye, everyone.